What does it really take to change the world? Is it intelligence, hard work, timing, or the ability to imagine a future that nobody else can see? Throughout history, only a handful of people have managed to reshape how billions of humans communicate, think, and interact. One of those individuals is Mark Zuckerberg. Today, billions of people wake up every morning and check their phones. They open Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp without even thinking about it. These platforms have become such an important part of modern life that it's difficult to imagine a world without them. But long before Mark Zuckerberg became one of the richest and most powerful people on Earth, he was simply a curious young boy growing up in a small suburban town in New York. Mark Elliott Zuckerberg was born on May 14, 1984, in White Plains, New York. His father, Edward Zuckerberg, was a dentist, and his mother, Karen Zuckerberg, was a psychiatrist. The family valued education, curiosity, and discipline. Unlike most children his age, Mark wasn't interested in spending all of his time playing sports or watching television. He was fascinated by how machines worked and spent countless hours trying to understand computers. When Mark was around 10 years old, his father brought home a computer. For many children, it would have been a toy. For Mark Zuckerberg, it became an obsession that would shape the rest of his life. His parents soon realized that their son possessed extraordinary talent. They hired private tutors to help him learn computer programming. But something unexpected happened. Mark learned so quickly that even some of his teachers struggled to keep up with him. By the time he entered his teenage years, Mark was already building software applications. One of his earliest creations was a messaging system called ZuckNet, which allowed computers in his home and his father's dental office to communicate instantly. At an age when most teenagers were still trying to decide what they wanted to become, Mark Zuckerberg had already begun building the future. As Mark Zuckerberg grew older, his passion for technology became stronger with every passing year. While many teenagers spent their afternoons hanging out with friends or participating in sports, Mark spent countless hours writing code, reading about computers, and experimenting with new ideas. To him, programming wasn't just a hobby. It was a way of understanding the world. During his high school years, Mark attended Phillips Exeter Academy, one of the most prestigious schools in America. The school was known for producing exceptional students, but even there, Mark's abilities stood out. He excelled in mathematics, science, literature, and classical studies, proving that his talents extended far beyond computer programming. Despite his academic success, computers remained his true passion. Mark became fascinated by the idea of artificial intelligence and software that could learn from human behavior. Long before artificial intelligence became a global phenomenon, he was already experimenting with concepts that would later become part of everyday technology. One of Mark's most impressive early projects was a music recommendation software called Synapse Media Player. The program could analyze a person's listening habits and predict which songs they might enjoy in the future. This technology was years ahead of its time. The software quickly attracted attention. Several technology companies reportedly became interested in acquiring the program and hiring Mark. For a teenager, these opportunities could have changed his life forever. But Mark wasn't interested in becoming an employee. He wanted to build something much bigger. In 2002, after graduating from high school, Mark Zuckerberg achieved something that millions of students dream about. He was accepted into Harvard University, one of the most prestigious educational institutions in the world. Harvard had produced presidents, Nobel Prize winners, scientists, and business leaders. Soon, it would also become the birthplace of one of the most powerful companies in history. When Mark arrived at Harvard, he quickly gained a reputation as one of the most talented programmers on campus. Students began recognizing him not only for his intelligence but also for his ability to create software that solved real problems. However, nobody at Harvard could have predicted what would happen next. Within just a few years, Mark Zuckerberg would create a platform that would connect billions of people, generate hundreds of billions of dollars, and change human communication forever. As Mark Zuckerberg settled into life at Harvard University, he quickly became known as one of the smartest and most talented programmers on campus. His dorm room wasn't just a place to sleep or study. It had become a laboratory of ideas. While many students spent their nights attending parties or social events, Mark often stayed awake until early morning, writing code and experimenting with new projects. Mark was fascinated by one simple question: how could technology bring people together? This question would eventually lead him to create one of the most influential platforms in human history. But before Facebook existed, there was another project, one that would create controversy and change Mark's life forever. In October 2003, Mark Zuckerberg began working on a website called FaceMash. The idea was simple but controversial. The website displayed photos of Harvard students side by side and asked users to vote on who was more attractive. To build FaceMash, Mark accessed publicly available student directories and created a system that compared photographs. He built the entire website in a matter of days. What happened next shocked everyone. Within hours of launching, FaceMash became one of the most talked about websites on the Harvard campus. Hundreds of students visited the website. The traffic became so intense that parts of Harvard's computer network reportedly experienced problems. However, the success of FaceMash came at a price. Many students and university officials believed that the website violated privacy rules. Complaints began pouring in, and Harvard administrators launched an investigation. Mark Zuckerberg suddenly found himself at the center of a major controversy. He faced disciplinary action and criticism from many people around him. For a young college student, it could have been the end of his career before it had even begun. But Mark Zuckerberg saw something that others did not. He realized that people were fascinated by online identity and digital social connections. FaceMash had failed, but it had revealed a powerful truth. People wanted to connect online. This realization would change everything. Over the next few months, Mark began working on a new idea. Unlike FaceMash, this platform wouldn't compare people. Instead, it would connect them. On February 4, 2004, from a small dormitory room at Harvard University, Mark Zuckerberg launched a website called The Facebook. Nobody, not Mark, not his friends, and not the world, could have imagined that this simple college project would eventually connect billions of people across the planet. Within just a few days of launching the Facebook, something extraordinary happened. Students across Harvard University began creating accounts at an incredible pace. The platform spread through campus conversations, dormitories, classrooms, and student communities. Almost everyone wanted to know what this new website was and why so many students were talking about it. For Mark Zuckerberg, the success of the Facebook was both exciting and overwhelming. He had created the website primarily for Harvard students, but the demand quickly grew beyond anything he had expected. Students from other universities started requesting access to the platform. Soon, the Facebook expanded beyond Harvard. It was introduced at prestigious universities such as Yale, Columbia, Stanford, and many others. Everywhere it launched, the response was the same. Students loved the idea of connecting with friends online through a real identity-based network. But just as Mark Zuckerberg's dream was beginning to become reality, serious problems emerged. 3 Harvard students, Cameron Winklevoss, Tyler Winklevoss, and Divya Narendra, accused Mark of stealing their idea for a social networking website. The accusations quickly turned into one of the most famous legal battles in the history of Silicon Valley. The 3 students claimed that Mark had agreed to work on their social networking project but instead used their ideas to build the Facebook. For Mark Zuckerberg, this was a defining moment. He was only a college student, yet he was already facing lawsuits, criticism, and enormous pressure. However, he remained focused on one thing: building the future of social networking. As the Facebook continued growing, Mark and his small team realized that they were no longer building a college project. They were building a company that had the potential to transform the world. In the summer of 2004, Mark Zuckerberg made one of the most important decisions of his life. He left Harvard University and moved to Palo Alto, California, the heart of the technology industry. The team's first office was not a luxurious corporate building. It was a small rented house where employees worked day and night. They slept on floors, ate fast food, and spent nearly every waking hour trying to improve Facebook. At that time, nobody knew whether Facebook would survive. Many internet companies had already failed during the dot-com crash. Investors were cautious, competitors were everywhere, and success was far from guaranteed. But Mark Zuckerberg believed something that most people did not. He believed that one day, every person in the world would want to connect digitally. And if he was right, Facebook would become one of the most powerful companies in human history. As Facebook continued to grow, Mark Zuckerberg and his small team found themselves at the center of a technological revolution. What had started as a social network for college students was rapidly transforming into a platform with global potential. Every week, thousands of new users joined Facebook, and the company's servers struggled to keep up with the overwhelming demand. By 2005, Facebook was no longer just another internet startup. It had become one of the fastest-growing technology platforms in America. Investors began paying attention, and some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley started seeing Facebook as the future of the internet. One of the biggest turning points came when entrepreneur and investor Peter Thiel invested in Facebook. This investment provided not only money but also credibility. Suddenly, Facebook was no longer a student experiment, it was a serious business. As Facebook expanded, Mark Zuckerberg made a decision that many people considered risky. He opened the platform beyond universities. Eventually, anyone with an email address could join Facebook. This decision changed everything. The number of users exploded. Millions of people joined Facebook. Families connected with relatives. Friends reconnected after years apart. Businesses discovered a new way to reach customers. Politicians, celebrities, and public figures all began using the platform. As Facebook grew, so did Mark Zuckerberg's influence and wealth. The young programmer who had once worked from a Harvard dorm room was now becoming one of the most powerful entrepreneurs in the world. Then came one of the most shocking moments in Silicon Valley history. In 2006, Yahoo reportedly offered to buy Facebook for $1 billion. At that time, Facebook was still a relatively young company, and $1 billion was an unimaginable amount of money. Many people believed Mark Zuckerberg would accept the offer. Friends, investors, and business experts thought it was impossible to reject such an enormous amount of money. But Mark made a decision that would define his legacy forever. Mark Zuckerberg believed that Facebook could become much larger than anyone imagined. He believed that the world was only beginning to understand the power of social networking. And history would prove that he was right. Over the next few years, Facebook's growth became almost unbelievable. Tens of millions turned into hundreds of millions. The company expanded across continents and became one of the most important communication platforms in human history. And as Facebook conquered the digital world, Mark Zuckerberg crossed a milestone that few people ever achieve. Before the age of 30, he had become one of the youngest self-made billionaires in history. By the beginning of the next decade, Facebook was no longer simply a social networking website. It had become a global phenomenon. Hundreds of millions of people used Facebook every month, and the company was generating billions of dollars in revenue. Governments, businesses, celebrities, and ordinary people had all become part of the Facebook ecosystem. For Mark Zuckerberg, however, success was not enough. He believed that Facebook had the potential to become something far greater than a website. He wanted to build an ecosystem that would dominate the future of digital communication. In May 2012, Facebook entered a new chapter in its history. The company launched its initial public offering, commonly known as an IPO. It was one of the largest and most anticipated stock market offerings in the history of technology. When Facebook became a public company, Mark Zuckerberg's personal wealth increased dramatically. Overnight, he became one of the richest individuals in the world. At just 28 years old, he had accumulated a fortune that most people could never imagine. But while many billionaires focused on luxury, Mark Zuckerberg focused on expansion. He understood something that many other technology leaders did not. He knew that the future of communication would not belong to one platform alone. In 2012, Mark Zuckerberg made one of the most important business decisions of his career. He purchased Instagram for approximately $1 billion. At that time, many experts criticized the decision. They believed paying $1 billion for a photo-sharing application was irrational. But Mark Zuckerberg was thinking years ahead of everyone else. He understood that mobile devices would dominate the future and that visual content would become one of the most powerful forms of communication. 2 years later, Mark shocked the entire technology industry once again. In 2014, Facebook acquired WhatsApp for approximately $19 billion. It was one of the largest technology acquisitions in history. Once again, critics questioned the decision. Why would anyone spend $19 billion on a messaging application? But Mark Zuckerberg saw something others failed to recognize. He saw the future of global communication. By acquiring Instagram and WhatsApp, Mark Zuckerberg had effectively built one of the largest digital ecosystems ever created. Billions of people around the world were now using products controlled by a single company. Mark Zuckerberg had achieved something extraordinary. He was no longer simply a programmer, an entrepreneur, or even a billionaire. He had become one of the most powerful individuals in the history of technology. As Mark Zuckerberg's business empire expanded across the globe, so did his personal wealth. Year after year, Facebook's success pushed him higher on the list of the world's richest people. But unlike many billionaires who openly displayed their wealth through extravagant lifestyles, luxury parties, and expensive collections, Mark Zuckerberg developed a reputation for being one of the most private billionaires in the world. To the public, Mark Zuckerberg often appeared simple. He frequently wore gray t-shirts, jeans, and minimal accessories. This image created the impression that he lived an ordinary life. But behind the scenes, the reality was very different. As one of the wealthiest individuals on Earth, Mark Zuckerberg had access to resources that most people could never imagine. He began building an extensive portfolio of luxury properties, private security systems, and investments designed to protect both his family and his future. One of Mark Zuckerberg's most valuable assets is his extensive real estate portfolio. Over the years, he purchased multiple luxury homes in California, particularly around Silicon Valley, where many of the world's most powerful technology executives live. However, one of his most controversial and fascinating investments was made thousands of miles away from Silicon Valley, on the Hawaiian island of Kauai. Mark Zuckerberg quietly began purchasing large areas of land, eventually acquiring hundreds of acres of property. Reports suggested that these properties included luxury residences, private beaches, farmland, and highly secured compounds. The scale of these purchases surprised many observers and generated significant public discussion. As Mark Zuckerberg's wealth continued growing, another expense increased dramatically: personal security. Being one of the most recognizable people in the world brought unique challenges and risks. Reports indicated that Meta spent millions of dollars annually on Mark Zuckerberg's personal security. This included private security teams, transportation, residential protection, and advanced surveillance systems. Despite his enormous wealth, Mark Zuckerberg rarely displayed the extravagant lifestyle associated with many billionaires. He was not known for collecting supercars, organizing extravagant parties, or publicly displaying luxury possessions. Instead, Mark Zuckerberg invested heavily in technology, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and long-term projects that he believed could shape the future of humanity itself. But with great power came enormous responsibility. As Facebook's influence expanded across the world, Mark Zuckerberg would soon face some of the biggest controversies, investigations, and public criticism ever experienced by a technology leader. As Facebook became one of the most powerful companies in the world, Mark Zuckerberg found himself facing a challenge that no entrepreneur could have fully prepared for. The same platform that connected billions of people was now being accused of influencing politics, spreading misinformation, and threatening user privacy on a global scale. For years, Facebook had been celebrated as one of the greatest technological innovations in history. Governments praised it. Businesses depended on it. Families used it to stay connected. But as the platform grew larger, critics began asking an important question. Who controls the information seen by billions of people? In 2018, one of the biggest controversies in Facebook's history exploded into public view. Reports revealed that a political consulting firm known as Cambridge Analytica had gained access to data from millions of Facebook users without their knowledge. The story shocked the world. Questions about privacy, data protection, and corporate responsibility dominated global headlines. Suddenly, Mark Zuckerberg was no longer being viewed simply as a successful entrepreneur. He had become one of the most controversial figures in technology. As public pressure intensified, Mark Zuckerberg faced one of the most difficult moments of his career. He was called to testify before the United States Congress. For the first time, lawmakers directly questioned the man who had built one of the world's largest digital platforms. Millions of people around the world watched as Mark Zuckerberg sat before lawmakers and answered questions about privacy, security, and the future of social media. The hearings became one of the most watched events in technology history. For many observers, the hearings represented more than just an investigation into Facebook. They symbolized a larger question facing humanity. Had technology become too powerful? Despite the criticism and controversy, Mark Zuckerberg remained determined to protect and expand his company. He publicly apologized for mistakes, promised reforms, and invested billions of dollars into improving security and privacy systems. But Mark Zuckerberg was already thinking about the next technological revolution. He believed that social media alone was not the future. He believed that the next chapter of human communication would be built in virtual worlds powered by artificial intelligence and immersive technology. In 2021, Mark Zuckerberg shocked the world once again. He announced that Facebook would change its name and become Meta. It was one of the boldest decisions in corporate history and marked the beginning of a new era. When Mark Zuckerberg announced that Facebook would become Meta in October 2021, the reaction around the world was immediate. Some people called it a brilliant strategic decision. Others believed it was one of the biggest risks ever taken by a technology company. But for Mark Zuckerberg, the decision was not about changing a company name. It was about changing the future. Mark Zuckerberg believed that the internet was about to undergo another transformation. In his vision, people would no longer interact through simple screens and smartphones. Instead, they would enter immersive digital worlds where they could work, play, learn, and socialize through virtual reality and augmented reality technologies. To achieve this vision, Meta invested tens of billions of dollars into developing virtual reality technologies. The company hired thousands of engineers, researchers, and scientists. Entire divisions were created to build what Zuckerberg called the future of human connection. However, not everyone shared Mark Zuckerberg's optimism. Investors became concerned about the enormous amount of money being spent on projects that might take many years to become profitable. As a result, Meta faced significant criticism and financial pressure. At the same time, another technological revolution was beginning to reshape the world: artificial intelligence. Companies across the globe began investing heavily in AI systems capable of generating text, images, videos. Mark Zuckerberg quickly recognized that artificial intelligence could become even more important than social media itself. Meta began investing billions of dollars into AI research, supercomputers, and large language models capable of competing with the world's leading AI companies. During this period, the media also became fascinated by the growing rivalry between Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. Both men were among the world's richest and most influential technology leaders, yet they represented very different visions of the future. Elon Musk focused on electric vehicles, space exploration, robotics, and artificial intelligence. Mark Zuckerberg focused on social networks, virtual reality, and digital communication. Their differences fascinated millions of people around the world. Despite decades of success, controversy, and enormous wealth, Mark Zuckerberg continued to work with the same intensity that had defined his life since childhood. He remained convinced that the next technological revolution was still ahead. From a curious boy in New York to one of the most powerful people in human history, Mark Zuckerberg's journey has been filled with extraordinary achievements, difficult decisions, global controversies, and unimaginable success. Whether people admire him or criticize him, one fact remains undeniable: he changed the way humanity communicates forever. The story of Mark Zuckerberg is not just the story of a billionaire. It is the story of how one idea, created in a small college dorm room, grew powerful enough to influence the lives of billions of people around the world.